July 1st, 1553. A skeletal figure appears at the palace window. The crowd below freezes in horror. Is that their king? The boy is barely recognizable, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, a ghost in royal robes. 5 days later, Edward VI would be dead. He was 15 years old, and he knew exactly what was coming. Before we reveal what his final hours were really like, hit that subscribe button, because the darkest stories in history deserve to be remembered. This is the true story of a dying boy who tried to control a kingdom from his deathbed, even as his body rotted from the inside out. January 1553. The palace corridors whisper with dread. King Edward VI, just 15 years old, collapses during a routine day at court. One moment he's attending to state matters, the next he's burning with fever, his body trembling uncontrollably. His physicians rush to his chambers, their faces grave. This isn't the first time the young king has fallen ill, but something about this feels different. Darker. The boy king has always been resilient. 2 years earlier, in April 1551, he survived both measles and smallpox within months of each other. The court celebrated his recovery, convinced their king was blessed with Tudor strength. But what they didn't know was that those diseases had ravaged something deep inside him. His immune system, once robust, was now fractured, vulnerable, and something ancient and deadly was waiting. Tuberculosis, the White Plague. The disease that had haunted the Tudor bloodline for generations was now awakening inside Edward's lungs. It had likely been dormant in his body for years, lurking in the shadows, biding its time. Now, with his defenses shattered, it struck. The symptoms begin subtly. A persistent cough that won't fade, breathlessness after climbing stairs, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of rest can cure. Edward tries to hide it at first. Kings don't show weakness. Kings don't falter. But his body betrays him. By February, the cough becomes constant. Court officials notice the king pausing mid-sentence, covering his mouth with a cloth. His attendants see him gripping furniture for support, his legs weakening beneath him. The once energetic boy, who loved jousting and hunting, now struggles to walk the length of his own chambers. The Tudor court, always obsessed with appearances, goes into damage control. Rumors are dangerous. If word spreads that the king is dying, the kingdom could descend into chaos. Edward has no heir, no children. His half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth wait in the wings, their religious differences threatening to tear England apart. So the counselors lie. They smile at foreign ambassadors and assure them the king is merely tired. They write letters describing Edward's excellent health, his rosy cheeks, his vigorous spirit. They hold meetings behind closed doors, their voices hushed and urgent. But inside the royal apartments, the truth is impossible to ignore. Edward sits by the fire, a blanket draped over his thinning frame, and he coughs, and coughs, and coughs. The sound echoes through the palace, a death rattle that no amount of propaganda can silence. His physicians exchange worried glances. They've seen this before. They know what's coming. The 15-year-old king stares into the flames, and somewhere deep inside, he knows it too. The fever that started in January won't break. The cough won't stop. His body is turning against him, and there's nothing anyone can do but watch. May 1553. The coughing fits have transformed into something far worse. Edward leans over a basin, his entire body convulsing as he tries to expel what's trapped in his lungs. When he finally pulls away, gasping for air, his attendants see it. The cloth is stained with something that makes their stomachs turn. Greenish-yellow mucus, thick and viscous. But that's not the worst part. Mixed within it are streaks of black, dark, putrid chunks that smell of decay. Sometimes the color shifts to pink, tinged with fresh blood from his ravaged lungs. His doctors examine the sputum with growing alarm, writing frantic notes in their medical journals. They've never seen anything quite like this. The disease is no longer hiding. It's announcing itself, with every breath Edward takes. By mid-May, his legs begin to swell. At first, it's barely noticeable, a slight puffiness around his ankles. But within days, the swelling creeps upward, consuming his calves, his thighs. The skin stretches tight and shiny, painful to the touch. He can no longer stand without assistance. Walking becomes impossible. Edward spends his days lying flat on his back, staring at the ceiling of his bedchamber. Any attempt to sit upright triggers violent coughing spasms that leave him breathless and bleeding. His once athletic frame is now a prison, bloated and failing. Then the ulcers appear, small at first. Red, angry sores that break out across his swollen legs. Then his arms, his back. Anywhere his skin touches the bedding for too long, the flesh begins to rot. The servants change his linens constantly, but nothing stops the spread. The ulcers weep and blister, adding another layer of torment to his suffering. The stench becomes unbearable. Despite the servants' best efforts with perfumes and fresh flowers, the smell of infection permeates the royal apartments. Death has a scent, and it's filling the palace. Desperate for a solution, Edward's counselors make a decision. They'll move him to Greenwich Palace. The air there is cleaner, they reason. Away from London's filth and disease, perhaps the king's lungs can heal. Perhaps the fresh river breeze will restore him. It's a fool's hope, and they know it. The journey to Greenwich is agony. Every bump in the road sends shockwaves of pain through Edward's swollen body. He arrives pale and trembling, immediately confined to his bed. The move has achieved nothing except relocating his suffering to a different set of walls. By late May, sleep becomes his enemy. The moment he closes his eyes, the coughing starts. His throat raw, his chest burning, he gasps for air that won't satisfy. His doctors resort to opiates' heavy doses that offer a few hours of unconsciousness before the pain drags him back to waking. At 15, Edward has become intimately familiar with suffering, and he's beginning to understand something terrible. This isn't going to end, not with recovery, not with healing. Only one way out remains. While Edward deteriorates behind closed doors, his counselors launch a campaign of lies. May 7, 1553, William Petter, one of the king's most trusted secretaries, sits at his desk composing letters to foreign courts. His quill moves with practiced ease across the parchment. His Majesty shows remarkable improvement, he writes. The physicians expect he shall take the air very soon and resume his duties with renewed vigor. Every word is fiction. The Duke of Northumberland, the most powerful man in England after the king himself, tells similar tales. He corners William Cecil in the palace corridors, speaking in low, confident tones. The doctors assure me of full recovery, he insists. Within weeks, our king will ride again. Cecil nods, but his eyes betray doubt. He's heard the coughing through the palace walls. The charade is necessary. England teeters on a knife's edge. Catholic Spain watches hungrily from across the channel. Scotland plots in the north. France schemes in the south. Any sign of weakness, any hint that the Protestant boy king is dying, could trigger invasion, or worse, civil war. So they smile, they reassure, they fabricate. But on May 12th, the truth slips through the cracks. The imperial ambassador, a shrewd observer of court politics, writes to his master Emperor Charles V. His sources inside the palace have revealed what others dare not speak. The king, he reports, suffers from a suppurating tumor of the lung. Suppurating, festering, rotting. The word spreads in whispers through European courts, even as English officials continue their denials. Two realities exist simultaneously, the public fiction of recovery and the private certainty of death. Inside Edward's chamber, new horrors emerge. His attendants notice his hair coming loose in clumps when they brush it. Strands fall onto his pillows, leaving bare patches on his scalp. Then his fingernails begin to separate from their beds, loosening and peeling away. His body is consuming itself, breaking down from the inside out. Yet still the letters flow from Westminster. Still the reassurances echo through the halls. The king improves daily. His appetite returns. He speaks of hunting come autumn. Lies built upon lies. The counselors aren't just protecting England's stability. They're protecting themselves. If Edward dies before they secure the succession, everything they've built could crumble. Their power, their positions, their very lives depend on controlling what happens next. So they keep the king isolated. Only the most loyal servants are permitted entry. Visitors are turned away with cheerful excuses. Even his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth are denied access, kept ignorant of their brother's true condition. In the throne room, musicians play. In the gardens, courtiers laugh and gossip. Business continues as usual. But in Greenwich Palace, behind heavy wooden doors and drawn curtains, a 15-year-old boy lies dying. And everyone knows it. They just can't afford to admit it yet. Edward knows the truth his counselors try to hide. He's dying. And he's terrified of what comes after. Not death itself. He's made peace with that. What haunts him is the kingdom he'll leave behind. England, his Protestant England, balanced on the edge of a blade. His half-sister Mary waits to inherit the throne, and Mary is Catholic. Everything Edward has fought for, every religious reform, every Protestant prayer book, every closed monastery, all of it could be undone. He can't let that happen. So from his sickbed, Edward begins to write. His hands shake as he grips the quill, but his mind remains sharp. The document he creates is called My Devise for the Succession. It's his last attempt to control a future he won't live to see. The plan is simple at first. Skip over Mary and Elizabeth entirely. Instead, pass the crown to the male heirs of his cousin, Francis Brandon. Strong Protestant boys who will continue his work. There's just one problem. Those boys don't exist yet. They haven't been born. Edward stares at the parchment, reality crushing down on him. He's running out of time. His breathing grows more labored each day. He won't survive long enough for any male heir to be born, let alone grow old enough to rule. He needs another solution. Now, his eyes fall on a different name. Lady Jane Grey, Francis Brandon's daughter. 15 years old, just like him. Brilliant, educated, and most importantly devoutly Protestant. She's already married to the son of the Duke of Northumberland, cementing powerful alliances. She have to do. Edward scratches out portions of his devise, rewriting the succession. Jane Grey will be queen. Not Mary, not Elizabeth. Jane. But there's a problem. This contradicts his father's will. It contradicts parliamentary law. Technically, it's treason. Edward doesn't care. God's work matters more than man's law. June 12th. He summons the judges to Greenwich Palace. They arrive expecting routine business, and instead find themselves trapped in a nightmare. The dying king, propped up in his bed, demands they make his devise legally binding. The judges hesitate. Your Majesty, this cannot make it legal. Edward's voice, weakened by disease, still carries royal command. Now, the judges exchange panicked glances. If they refuse, they face the king's wrath. If they agree, they commit treason against the rightful heir. They're caught between a dying boy and the law. Edward doesn't give them a choice. He threatens. He insists. His desperation fills the room like poison. By June 21st, the letters patent are issued. Lady Jane Grey is now, legally and officially, Edward's heir. The 15-year-old king slumps back against his pillows, exhausted but satisfied. He's done it. He's secured Protestant England's future, or so he believes. In reality, he has just lit the fuse on a powder keg that will explode the moment he takes his final breath. But Edward doesn't know that yet. For now, he can rest. His work is finished. Early July. Edward's body crosses a new threshold of suffering. For weeks, he's barely eaten a few spoonfuls of broth, perhaps a piece of bread softened in wine. His appetite vanished months ago, but he forced himself to take something, anything, to maintain his strength. Now even that small mercy is gone. The first time it happens, his attendants think it's just a bad moment. Edward manages a few bites of carefully prepared food, something bland and easy to digest. Minutes later, his stomach revolts. He vomits violently, his whole body heaving with the effort. The food comes back up, barely changed from when it went down. His stomach can no longer process anything. They try different foods, softer broths, watered wine, milk mixed with honey. Nothing stays down. His body rejects everything, as if it's forgotten how to sustain itself. Within hours of eating, the retching begins, leaving Edward weaker each time. The physicians watch helplessly. Without nourishment, the body cannibalizes itself. Edward's muscles, already wasted from months of illness, begin to disappear entirely. His cheeks hollow further. His collarbones jut out like knife edges beneath his nightshirt. His wrists become so thin, his attendants fear they might snap when they help him move. He's literally starving to death, even as servants stand ready with plates of food he cannot eat. But the vomiting isn't the worst of it. The cough, his constant companion since January, intensifies into something monstrous. The fits last longer, now 10 minutes, 15, sometimes more. His whole body convulses with each spasm, ribs straining, face turning purple from lack of air. When he finally catches his breath, the black sputum comes. More of it than before. Darker, thicker. The smell alone makes servants gag as they carry away the soiled cloths. It's the smell of tissue dying inside his chest, his lungs rotting piece by piece. His swollen belly grows tighter. The fluid buildup isn't just in his legs anymore. It's everywhere. His abdomen distends like a grotesque pregnancy, the skin stretched so taut it shines in the candlelight. His kidneys, overwhelmed by infection, have begun to fail. The poison his body should be expelling is instead pooling inside him, turning his blood toxic. Edward can feel it happening. He's trapped inside a body that's becoming his tomb. The physicians exchange grim looks, but say nothing. They recognize the signs. The inability to eat. The kidney failure. The spreading infection. This is general septicemia blood poisoning, moving through every organ, shutting them down one by one. There are no treatments, no cures. No miracles left to pray for. Edward lies in his bed at Greenwich Palace, his stomach empty and aching, his lungs drowning in their own decay, his blood turning septic. And somewhere in the back of his fading mind, he knows what's coming next. He's seen enough death to recognize it when it stands at the foot of his bed, waiting. July 1st, 1553. A crowd gathers outside Greenwich Palace. Rumors have circulated for weeks that the king is recovering. Some say he's walking the gardens. Others claim he's been seen riding. The people want proof. They want to see their sovereign with their own eyes, healthy and strong. The Duke of Northumberland knows what must be done. One final performance. One last illusion to buy them time. He approaches Edward's bedchamber with a request that sounds simple, but requires everything the dying boy has left. Your Majesty, the people need to see you. Edward understands. This is politics. This is survival, not his, but the kingdom's. If the crowd sees him alive, even briefly, it will quiet the whispers. It will buy his counselors a few more days to prepare for what comes next. He agrees. 2 attendants lift Edward from his bed. His legs buckle immediately. They haven't supported his weight in weeks. The servants practically carry him, his arms draped over their shoulders, his feet dragging across the floor. Every step toward the window is agony. They position him carefully, propping him upright so he won't collapse. Someone adjusts his nightshirt, trying to make him look presentable. There's no time for royal robes or ceremony. This has to happen now, before his strength fails completely. Edward grips the window frame with skeletal fingers, takes a breath, steps forward into the light. Below, the crowd erupts in cheers. Their king, alive! But the celebration dies in their throats within seconds. The figure at the window doesn't look like Edward VI. It looks like something wearing his skin. His face is a skull wrapped in pale flesh. Sunken eyes sit deep in their sockets, ringed with dark circles that make him look already dead. His cheekbones jut out sharply, casting shadows across his hollow face. What little hair remains on his head hangs limp and lifeless. His body, once athletic and strong, has withered to nothing. The nightshirt hangs off his frame like cloth draped over bones. His neck is so thin, it seems impossible it can support his head. Some in the crowd don't recognize him. They turn to their neighbors, confused. Is that truly the king? They whisper. Others simply stare, mouths open in horror. A few of the women begin to cry. This isn't their vigorous young monarch. This is a ghost. A corpse standing upright through sheer force of will. Edward stands there for perhaps 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. It feels like an eternity. He raises one trembling hand in a gesture that might be a wave, might be a ply for help. Then he's gone. The attendants pull him back from the window, lowering him carefully as his legs give out completely. The crowd below stands in stunned silence. They came hoping for reassurance. Instead, they've just watched their king say goodbye. After the window appearance, Edward is carried back to his bed and doesn't leave it again. The performance has cost him everything. Whatever small reserves of strength he had left are now gone, spent on those 30 seconds of standing upright. He lies motionless, each breath a labored wheeze, staring at nothing. One of his closest attendants sits beside him in the quiet hours. The room smells of sickness, despite the servants' endless efforts. Candles flicker. Outside, the summer sun shines on a world Edward will never see again. In a moment of raw honesty, Edward speaks. His voice is barely a whisper, but the words cut through the silence like a blade. I am glad to die. The attendant freezes, unsure how to respond. Kings aren't supposed to say such things. Kings fight. Kings cling to life, but Edward isn't being dramatic. He's simply telling the truth. He's been suffering for 7 months. 7 months of watching his body betray him piece by piece. 7 months of coughing up pieces of his own lungs. 7 months of pain that no medicine can touch, no prayer can ease. Every single breath hurts. The simple act of drawing air into his ruined lungs feels like inhaling broken glass. The coughing fits leave him gasping and bleeding, his throat raw, his chest burning. There's no relief, no rest. Even the opiates barely dull the edge anymore. His skin has become a map of suffering. The ulcers that started on his legs have spread everywhere his body touches the bed. Some have opened, weeping fluid that soaks through the linens no matter how often they're changed. Others have crusted over, only to crack and bleed when he shifts position. He can't eat, can't stand, can't even sit up without triggering convulsions that make him wish for unconsciousness. At 15 years old, Edward has lived a lifetime of pain compressed into months. He's had time to think about it, lying in the dark. Time to understand that this will never get better. There's no recovery waiting at the end of this road. Only more suffering, stretching on day after day until his body finally surrenders. Death isn't the enemy anymore. Death is mercy. So when he says, I am glad to die, he means it. He's ready. He welcomes it. He prays for it. The attendant sits in silence, not knowing what to say to a king who's given up. What comfort can you offer someone whose body has become a torture chamber? Edward closes his eyes, but sleep won't come. It never does during the day. Only at night, when the opiates are strongest, does he find brief escape. His most trusted servants remain close, the only witnesses to these final days. Everyone else has been sent away. There's no point in pretending anymore. No reason to maintain the illusion of recovery. This is the end, and everyone in that room knows it. They're just waiting now, waiting for death to finish what it started 7 months ago. July 6th, 1553. Edward wakes knowing this is the day. There's a clarity that comes at the very end, a strange awareness that the body has finally reached its limit. He feels it in the weakness of his pulse, the coldness creeping into his extremities. The way sounds seem distant and muffled. He calls for Thomas Goodrich, Bishop of Ely. If he's going to face God, he wants to do it properly. Confession must be heard. Prayers must be said. His soul requires preparation, even if his body is beyond saving. Goodrich arrives quickly, his face solemn. He's known Edward since childhood, watched him grow from promising prince to dying king. The old bishop settles beside the bed, and Edward begins his final confession. What sins does a 15-year-old king confess? What regrets does a boy carry to his grave? The conversation remains private, sealed between priest and dying soul. But Goodrich's eyes glisten as he offers absolution. As afternoon fades toward evening, Edward's inner circle gathers. These aren't politicians or counselors scheming over succession. These are the people who actually matter to him. Sir Henry Sidney, his closest companion, pulls a chair beside the bed. Sir Thomas Roth stands near the window. The physicians, Owen and Wendy, take their positions not to treat, but to witness. There's an unspoken understanding in the room. No one's here to save Edward. They're here to make sure he doesn't die alone. Edward's breathing changes. It becomes shallower, more irregular. Minutes pass between breaths. Then suddenly, a gasping inhale as his body fights to continue. His skin takes on a grayish pallor. His lips, once pink, turn bluish. He drifts in and out of consciousness. Sometimes his eyes open, focusing on nothing. Other times they close, and those gathered wonder if this is the moment. But then another breath comes, ragged and wet. Around 8 o'clock, Edward surfaces from the fog. His mind clears one final time, and he remembers what matters most, not politics, not succession, not even his own suffering, his faith. His lips move, forming words that come out barely audible. Prayers, the same Protestant prayers he's championed his entire reign. Even now, dying and desperate, he clings to the religion he tried to protect. Between labored breaths, he speaks of safeguarding the Protestant Church, of keeping England free from what he views as Catholic corruption. It's been his life's work, and even death won't make him abandon it. Sidney leans closer, straining to hear. Goodrich murmurs responses, guiding Edward through the prayers. The physicians check his pulse threadbare, fading. The summer light outside dims to twilight. Candles are lit around the chamber, casting dancing shadows on the walls. 9 o'clock approaches. Edward's breathing becomes increasingly labored. The gaps between breaths stretch longer. His pulse flutters weakly beneath his skin. Those gathered move closer, forming a silent circle around the dying king. The final hour has begun. The room falls into profound stillness. Edward lies on his back, his skeletal frame barely making an impression in the bed. The only sounds are the crackling of candles and his increasingly desperate attempts to breathe. Each inhale is a struggle. Each exhale might be the last. Sir Henry Sidney moves from his chair to the bedside. He's been Edward's companion through childhood, through lessons and games and the early days of kingship. Now he'll be companion through death. Sidney slides his arms carefully beneath Edward's shoulders, lifting him gently. The king weighs almost nothing, a collection of bones held together by will alone. Sidney cradles him like a child, supporting his head, keeping him upright to ease the breathing. Edward's eyes flutter open briefly. Does he recognize Sidney? Does he know where he is? There's no way to tell. His gaze is unfocused, looking at something beyond the room, beyond the living. The physicians stand useless against the wall. All their knowledge, all their treatments, All their expensive educations, none of it matters now. They're reduced to observers at an event they cannot stop or slow. Dr. Owen checks Edward's wrist one more time, feeling for the pulse. It's there, but barely. A weak flutter, irregular and fading. The candles cast long shadows across the chamber. Outside, night has fully fallen. Somewhere in the palace, servants go about their duties, unaware that history is unfolding in this room. Somewhere beyond the walls, England sleeps, not knowing their king is slipping away. Edward's breathing becomes erratic. 3 quick, shallow gasps followed by nothing. The silence stretches so long that those watching think it's over. Then suddenly another breath, harsh and rattling, as if his body forgot how to stop. His chest rises and falls with increasing difficulty. The lungs, destroyed by months of tuberculosis, can barely function. The air he manages to draw in isn't enough. His blood starves for oxygen. His brain begins to shut down. Sidney holds him tighter, murmuring words of comfort that Edward probably can't hear. Goodrich continues his prayers, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. Roth bows his head. The physicians exchange glances. It won't be long now. Edward's lips move slightly. Is he trying to speak? Trying to pray? Or is it just an involuntary movement, the body's final twitches before surrender? His pulse weakens further. The gaps between breaths grow longer. His skin turns cold to the touch, the warmth of life retreating to his core, making a last stand in his failing heart. The men in the room stand frozen, witnesses to something both ordinary and profound. People die every day. Kings die like everyone else. But there is something terrible about watching a 15-year-old boy, someone who should have decades ahead of him, fade into nothing. Sidney cradles the dying king and waits. They all wait for the moment when the breathing stops and doesn't start again. Between 8 and 9 o'clock, Edward surfaces one final time. His eyes open, clearer than they've been in days. For a brief moment, the fog lifts and he's present, fully aware of what's happening. He knows where he is. He knows who surrounds him. And he knows what comes next. His lips part. The men lean closer, straining to hear. Edward's voice is barely a whisper, thin as paper, but the words come with startling clarity. I am faint. A pause. His chest heaves with effort. Another breath, shallow and quick. Lord, have mercy upon me. The prayer continues, each word requiring immense concentration. His faith, the thing he's clung to throughout this nightmare, rises to the surface one last time. And take my spirit. It's not a plea born of fear. There's no desperation in his tone. It's a release, a surrender. After 7 months of fighting his own body, Edward is finally letting go. Goodrich responds with the traditional prayers, his voice breaking. Sidney holds the king closer, feeling the life draining from the boy in his arms. This is the moment they've been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Edward's eyes close again. His breathing slows to something almost peaceful. The violent gasping stops. The struggle ends. His face, contorted with pain for so long, relaxes into something resembling calm. Sidney will later write that Edward surrendered his spirit in great sweetness. It's the kind description of a friend trying to find grace in horror. The truth is more complicated. Death is never sweet, no matter how gently it's described. But perhaps, after everything Edward endured, there was relief in the final moment. His chest rises one last time, falls, doesn't rise again. The silence that follows is absolute. No one moves, no one speaks. They watch Edward's face, waiting for another breath that never comes. Dr. Owen reaches for his wrist, confirming what they already know. No pulse. Somewhere between 8 and 9 o'clock, on July 6, 1553, King Edward VI dies. He's in Greenwich Palace, the same sprawling complex where his father Henry VIII was born 52 years earlier. The symmetry is almost poetic, a Tudor dynasty beginning and ending in the same place, though Edward's death is hardly an ending. It's barely a pause before chaos. The boy who ruled England for 6 years and 7 months is gone. The king who survived smallpox and measles, only to be destroyed by tuberculosis. The 15-year-old who tried desperately to control the future from his deathbed. Sidney gently lowers Edward's body back to the bed. Someone closes the king's eyes. Goodrich makes the sign of the cross. The physicians record the time. Outside, the summer night continues, oblivious. Inside this chamber, a handful of men process what they've witnessed. England's boy king is dead, and the kingdom he tried so hard to protect is about to tear itself apart. The physicians make their request shortly after Edward's death. An autopsy. They need to understand what killed England's king. In the 16th century, royal autopsies are rare but not unheard of. The body must be examined, the cause of death officially recorded. History demands answers, even if those answers are horrifying. A surgeon is summoned. Edward's body is prepared. What they discover when they open his chest confirms their worst suspicions and reveals something even more grotesque than they imagined. His lungs are destroyed. 2 massive ulcers, separating and putrefied, occupy the space where healthy tissue should be. The infection has eaten through the lung tissue like acid, leaving cavities filled with dark, necrotic material. This is advanced tuberculosis in its final stage, the disease that's haunted the Tudor bloodline for generations. But the damage doesn't stop at the lungs. The infection has spread to the pleural cavity, the space surrounding the lungs. Fluid and pus have accumulated there, compressing what little functional lung tissue remained. Every breath Edward took in his final weeks was a battle against his own body, drowning itself. The surgeon examines further. Edward's other organs tell the story of systemic failure. The septicemia they suspected is confirmed. The infection traveled through his bloodstream, poisoning everything it touched. His kidneys show signs of severe damage, explaining the swelling that consumed his legs and abdomen. They were barely functioning by the end, unable to filter the toxins from his blood. The findings are recorded in medical documents. Consumption is the official cause tuberculosis, but it's the details that paint the true picture. The sheer extent of destruction inside a 15-year-old body. The fact that Edward survived as long as he did with lungs in this condition borders on miraculous. The autopsy reveals something else, too. There was never any hope. No treatment available in 1553 could have saved him. The moment tuberculosis established itself in his lungs, his fate was sealed. All the prayers, all the medicines, all the moves to palaces with cleaner air, none of it mattered. The disease was always going to win. The surgeons close Edward's body and prepare it for burial. They wash away the evidence of their examination, dress him in royal garments, make him presentable for the viewing that will come. But they can't wash away what they've seen. The image of those ruined lungs, those putrefied ulcers, that systematic destruction, it stays with them. This is what tuberculosis does. It doesn't kill quickly or cleanly. It devours slowly, piece by piece, organ by organ, until nothing functional remains. Edward didn't just die from disease. He was consumed by it, eaten from the inside out over 7 agonizing months. The official records will state simply, the king died of consumption on the 6th day of July, in the year of our Lord, 1553. But the men who opened his chest know the truth. They've seen what death looks like when it takes its time. And it's far worse than any document can convey. Edward's body doesn't go into the ground for over a month. It's an unusual delay, even by Tudor standards. Most royals are buried within weeks of death. But Edward's corpse becomes a political bargaining chip, caught between 2 powerful forces. His half-sister Mary, now queen, and the ministers who served her brother. The argument is about ceremony. Edward was Protestant, fiercely so. He spent his final conscious moments praying in English, using the Reformed prayers he championed. His whole reign was dedicated to stripping away Catholic ritual, replacing Latin Mass with English services, closing monasteries, burning icons. But Mary is Catholic, deeply, unshakably Catholic, and she wants to honor her brother with a proper Requiem Mass Latin prayers. Incense, all the ritual Edward spent 6 years trying to erase. The ministers push back. They argue it would be a betrayal of everything Edward stood for. To bury him with Catholic rites would be to spit on his memory, to undo his life's work before his body is even cold. The negotiations drag on through July. Edward's embalmed corpse waits in Greenwich Palace while politicians argue over his soul. Finally, a compromise is reached. There will be 2 ceremonies. On August 8, 1553, Edward's official funeral procession begins. The night before, a great parade winds through London, hundreds of clerks singing "Children from Christ's Hospital," poor beadsmen in their robes, servants dressed head to toe in black. Torches light the way as they march toward Westminster Abbey. The actual burial service uses the English prayer book, the one Edward himself helped create. It is the first royal funeral, conducted entirely in English rather than Latin. A small victory for the Protestant cause. A final nod to the dead king's wishes. Edward is laid to rest beneath the altar in Henry VII's Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey. The location is significant, buried with his grandfather, the founder of the Tudor dynasty. Even in death, he's positioned as a legitimate link in the chain of succession. But Mary isn't finished. In the Tower of London, away from public view, she holds her own private service. A Requiem Mass, complete with all the Catholic ceremony Edward despised. She prays for her brother's soul in Latin, burns incense, observes the old rituals. 2 funerals for one king. It's a perfect metaphor for the religious war Edward's death has unleashed. His body lies in Westminster Abbey, housed in an altar tomb in the same chapel where Henry VII rests. Visitors can still find it today, though few do. Edward VI remains one of England's most forgotten monarchs, overshadowed by his father's notoriety and his sister's dramatic reigns. But in that vault beneath Westminster, the physical evidence of his suffering is finally at rest. The boy who knew he was dying. The king who fought death for 7 months and lost. Edward VI, age 15. Buried far from the palace where he took his last breath, but at least finally married. Edward's death doesn't bring peace to England. It lights the fuse. Even before his body is cold, the plan he carved out from his deathbed, his devise for the succession, begins to move. On paper, it's clear. The crown is to pass not to his half-sisters Mary or Elizabeth, but to Lady Jane Grey, his Protestant cousin. Edward believed he was saving England from a Catholic future. Instead, he's created the perfect storm. In London, the Duke of Northumberland moves fast. He knows time is everything. News of the king's death is carefully contained at first, shared only among a tight circle of counselors and power brokers. The public hears nothing. There's no proclamation, no bells, no mourning clothes. Silence hangs over the capital while men in dark rooms decide the fate of the crown. The council begins preparing the transition exactly as Edward wanted. Letters are drawn up. Troops are positioned. Messengers ride out. Lady Jane Grey, who has not asked for any of this, is summoned. She's told that by the king's will, she is now the rightful heir to the throne of England. Jane is 17, deeply pious, and completely unprepared. According to later accounts, she reacts not with excitement, but with shock. Some say she faints. Others say she weeps, insisting she is not worthy to be queen. But Northumberland and the councillors press her. This isn't a request. It is a command shaped by Edward's dying hand and the hopes of the Protestant elite. While London is being reshaped around Jane, another story is unfolding far from court. Mary, Henry VIII's eldest surviving child, is in East Anglia when whispers reach her ears. The king is dead, Her name has been passed over. Her right to the throne set out in her father's will and recognized by law is being stolen. She doesn't hesitate. Mary mounts a horse and rides hard, heading for the eastern counties where she knows she can gather support. This is where Edward's carefully drawn device begins to crack. The councillors in London have a document. Mary has something stronger, legitimacy in the eyes of many nobles and commoners, and a cause people can rally behind. While Jane is being maneuvered into the role of queen, Mary is already writing letters, calling loyalists to her side. Powerful families answer. Men begin raising troops in her name. On July 10th, Lady Jane Grey is officially proclaimed queen in London. Trumpets sound. Heralds shout her name in the streets. From the windows and doorways, Londoners listen. The reaction is muted. There is no great swell of joy, no roaring approval. Most people barely know who Jane is. They do know Mary, the rightful heir by statute, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. And they understand one thing very clearly. Whatever Edward signed when he was dying is already dragging England toward confrontation. Edward thought his device would secure the kingdom. Instead, it has split it in two. Edward's death reveals something darker than politics or religion. It exposes a pattern written in blood and sickness across generations. The Tudors are cursed, not by witchcraft or supernatural forces, but by something far more insidious. Tuberculosis woven into their very bloodline. Edward is just the latest victim of a disease that's been stalking his family for decades. His grandfather, Henry VII, the man who won the crown at Bosworth Field and founded the dynasty, likely carried the disease. Historical records suggest he suffered from recurring respiratory illness, persistent coughing, and gradual physical decline. The symptoms match. The timeline fits. Henry VII may have passed tuberculosis down to his children like a deadly inheritance. Prince Arthur, Edward's uncle, was meant to be England's great hope. Henry VIII's older brother, married to Catherine of Aragon, destined to be king. He died at 15, the same age as Edward, after a mysterious wasting illness. The official cause was recorded as sweating sickness, but modern medical historians suspect tuberculosis. The sudden onset, a rapid decline, the inability to recover it all points to consumption. Arthur's death changed everything. It put Henry VIII on the throne, triggered the break with Rome when Henry tried to marry his brother's widow, and set in motion the religious upheaval that defined the century. One boy's death from disease reshaped European history. Then there's Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond. Henry VIII's illegitimate son, acknowledged and elevated, once considered a potential heir. He died at 17, again from a wasting illness consistent with tuberculosis. Another young Tudor, another life cut short by lungs that failed. The pattern is unmistakable. The Tudor bloodline carries death. It's not just the men. Pregnancy after pregnancy ended in stillbirth or infant death for Henry VIII's wives. Some historians believe tuberculosis played a role there too, weakening mothers, poisoning pregnancies before they could reach term. The dynasty that should have produced dozens of heirs instead struggled to keep even one child alive to adulthood. Edward represents the culmination of this curse. His father survived Henry VIII, lived to 47, unusually long for a Tudor man. But Edward, the precious male heir that cost his mother Jane Seymour her life, inherited the family weakness in full measure. He seemed healthy as a child, strong, even, active and athletic. But the disease was there, dormant, waiting. When measles and smallpox shattered his immune system in 1551 and 1552, tuberculosis awakened. And once active, it devoured him exactly as it had devoured his uncle and his great-uncle before him. The Tudors built an empire, defied the Pope, reshaped religion, conquered kingdoms. But they couldn't conquer the disease living in their own blood. 3 generations. 3 promising young men. all dead before 20 from the same killer. Edward's death isn't just personal tragedy. It's the fulfillment of a family curse that has been building since his grandfather seized the crown 70 years earlier. The Tudors were always living on borrowed time. Edward's destroyed lungs are simply the latest proof. History remembers Edward VI as the sickly boy king, the fragile child who never stood a chance. But recent historians have begun questioning that narrative, and what they've uncovered is unsettling. Before tuberculosis struck, Edward was thriving. Contemporary accounts from his early reign describe a robust young man, not a frail invalid. Foreign ambassadors reported him as lively and quick-witted. His tutors praised his physical vigor. He participated in sports, enjoyed riding, and showed every sign of becoming as physically imposing as his father. The sickly Edward myth was largely created after his death, a convenient story to explain why England lost its king so young. But the evidence suggests something different. Edward was healthy until disease destroyed him. This wasn't a weak boy destined to die young. This was a strong boy killed by circumstance. And that realization opens a darker question. What kind of king would Edward have become? The signs were already there, hidden beneath the tragedy of his illness. Edward's reign, even cut short at 15, was descending into something troubling. His religious zeal wasn't just passionate, it was becoming fanatical. He saw compromise as weakness, moderation as betrayal. His treatment of his sisters reveals the cold calculation beneath the pious surface. He wrote Mary out of succession not for political strategy, but because she refused to abandon Catholicism. Personal relationships meant nothing compared to religious purity. Family ties dissolved in the face of theological disagreement. Then there's the matter of his uncles. Edward kept a diary, and in it he recorded the execution of his uncle, the Duke of Somerset, with chilling detachment. No grief, no conflict. Just a simple notation that the man who had served as his protector was now dead. Some historians describe the entry as casual, almost indifferent. This is the behavior of someone learning to wield power without mercy. Had Edward lived another 20 years, England might have faced a monarch as formidable and terrifying as Henry VIII ever was. The same ruthlessness, the same conviction that his will and God's will were one and the same. His reign was already marked by religious persecution, forced conversions, and the brutal suppression of Catholic practice. With time and health, that tendency would likely have intensified. A mature Edward VI, with full control of his kingdom and an adult's capacity for calculated cruelty, could have been devastating. The Protestant Reformation under his rule might have been even bloodier than Mary's later Catholic restoration. We'll never know for certain. Tuberculosis ensured Edward's potential remained exactly that potential, frozen at 15, never tested by the full weight of adult power. But the fragments we do have suggest something historians are only now beginning to acknowledge. England may have dodged a bullet. The sickly boy king who died young might have grown into a monster. Edward's early death was a personal tragedy. For England, it might have been a mercy in disguise. History is written by survivors, and Edward didn't survive long enough to write his full story. July 1st, 1553. The window at Greenwich Palace. That image haunts Tudor history more than any portrait, any crown, any document Edward ever signed. Not the boy in royal robes painted by court artists. Not the king seated on his throne surrounded by counselors. But the skeletal figure propped up at that window, forcing himself to be seen one last time. The crowd below came expecting reassurance. They'd heard rumors the king was ill, but also rumors he was recovering. They wanted to see their monarch, healthy and whole, ready to rule for decades. Instead, they saw death. A walking corpse, hollow eyes sunk deep into a skull-like face, skin stretched thin over bones, a body so wasted that some didn't recognize him as human, let alone as their 15-year-old king. The silence that fell over the crowd was more telling than any scream. Horror doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it's the sharp intake of breath, the whispered questions, the terrible quiet when people realize they're witnessing something they can't unsee. Edward stood there for less than a minute, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 40, just long enough for everyone to understand. He was dying, and he knew it. That's what makes the moment so haunting. Edward could have refused. He could have stayed in bed, preserving what little strength remained. But he chose to appear, chose to let them see what 7 months of tuberculosis had done to him. Was it defiance? One last act of kingly duty? Or was it something darker? A final reminder that even kings are mortal. That flesh betrays everyone. That power means nothing when your lungs are rotting inside your chest. We'll never know his thoughts in that moment. But we know what happened next. 5 days later, he was dead. The window appearance became the defining image of his final days. Not his last words, not his deathbed prayers, but that brief, terrible glimpse of a boy reduced to bones, standing upright through sheer will. It's the image that followed the news of his death as it spread across Europe. Ambassadors wrote home describing the shocking sight. Courtiers told stories of the skeletal king at the window. The tale grew with each retelling, becoming legend. Even now, nearly 5 centuries later, that moment resonates. The ghost at the window. The dying king who refused to hide. Edward VI lived 15 years. He ruled for 6. He died after 7 months of unimaginable suffering. But that single appearance, that decision to show himself when he could barely stand, defined how history would remember him. Not as the Protestant reformer, not as Henry VIII's son, not even as the boy who tried to control succession from his deathbed, but as the ghost at the window, the king who looked death in the face and then turned to let his people see it too. That was his final act, his last message. This is what mortality looks like. Remember me this way.